I still remember the day my dad died. I was only 10, and the moment I heard my mom's words, it was as if someone tore my world apart, leaving behind only sharp, cold fragments that I was wounded by over and over again. My name is Catherine, and until that terrible day, my life was filled with joy, movement, and endless adventures that my dad and I created together. Every weekend morning started the same way. The light pre-dawn fog had not yet cleared, and we were already rolling our bikes to the park, while the city was just beginning to wake up, while the air was fresh and filled with the smells of grass and earth. I always tried to outrun him, competing with the wind, and I could hear him laughing, encouraging me with his usual, "Come on, Catherine, you can do it." I rushed forward, feeling my heart pounding somewhere in my throat, and my legs seemed to find a rhythm on their own. He was always there, even if he was left behind, always ready to catch, support, and teach. But not only in the park, he was with me, at any competition, at any time, in any weather. He appeared in the crowd, his voice carried over the field, over the treadmill. He never missed a single one of my workouts, always helped me become better, stronger, faster. If I fell, he would be the first to reach out. If I lost, he would remind me that the main thing is not victory, but the way to it. And I believed him. I believed that it would always be like this. But after the funeral, everything changed. Mom, who always looked at our training sessions with some disapproval, never shared my delight in speed, strength, and competitive spirit, suddenly decided that everything should be different now. "Catherine, darling, put those sneakers away," she said one day, putting a box of new ballet flats in front of me, her voice soft but insistent, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "I bought you beautiful shoes. Don't you want to try it?" I remember looking at them, small and fragile, as if they were made for someone else. At first, the changes were insignificant, almost imperceptible, but then, like an avalanche, they grew, absorbing everything that reminded me of the past. Instead of morning runs, there were dance lessons. Instead of a sports store, there were boutiques with dresses. Instead of sneakers, there were high-heeled shoes in which I could hardly walk. Mom seemed to enjoy turning me into a young lady. The holidays didn't bring sports equipment, but cosmetics, books about fashion and self-care, and I felt like I was losing myself. She tried to make me up in front of the mirror. I fidgeted, trying to dodge, but her voice was stern. "Every girl should learn this." I didn't want to be just a girl. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to run, feel the wind rushing through my hair, set new records. But every day it seemed to me that my mother was not seeing me in the mirror, but the reflection of the daughter she would like to have. 3 years have passed. 3 years of quiet but persistent war between me and Mom, where I desperately tried to save at least a part of myself, and she tried to change me. And then he appeared. Richard. A widower with a 9-year-old daughter. When Mom first started talking about him, I thought maybe things would change for the better. That maybe with the arrival of a new person in her life, she would give up trying to remake mine. I even began to hope. But that hope was dashed when I met Anna. Anna was everything I wasn't. Small, fragile, drowning in lace and frills, with immaculately styled curls and lips slightly tinted with gloss. She always behaved perfectly in front of adults, saying exactly the words that her parents wanted to hear, but as soon as they turned away, her mask slipped off, revealing a completely different Anna. She hid my things, wrote silly notes on my behalf, and tipped a glass of water over my textbooks, but as soon as I complained, everyone just shook their heads. "She's just expressing herself," Mom said, putting her arm around Anna's shoulders. "She's just a kid," Richard added. And I sat there, clenching my teeth, realizing that no one needed the truth. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I couldn't do anything. I was 13, Anna was 9. If I had suddenly responded in kind, if I had yelled at her, pushed her away, or just tried to show her her true colors, I knew how it would end. I was older, so in the eyes of adults, it was I who had to be reasonable, patient, understanding. I just had to accept her behavior, because she's a child. And every day I felt like the walls around me were narrowing, like I was slowly being squeezed out of my own home, like I was becoming a stranger among those who, it would seem, should be my family. The wedding was small and quick, held right in the backyard of our house on a warm, sunny Saturday afternoon, when the breeze gently waved the snow-white ribbons hung between the branches of an old maple tree, and my mother, dressed in a simple but exquisite ivory dress, beamed with happiness, looking at her new husband, his daughter. She looked at everyone who was gathered here, as if she had forgotten that I was among the guests, her own daughter, standing in the corner, frozen in an uncomfortable bridesmaid dress that pricked and tightened her shoulders. I felt like nothing more than an extra element in this carefully thought-out performance, where the roles were pre-planned, but there didn't seem to be a place for me. The next day, they moved in with us, and the house was filled with boxes, sacks, and drawers, in which pink dresses, satin ribbons, plush toys, makeup bags, and all kinds of accessories arrived like an endless avalanche, occupying closets, filling shelves, and turning my once familiar surroundings into the scenery of some alien, sickly sweet a world where there seemed to be no place for me or my previous lifestyle. "Mom," rang Anna's voice in the ear, that sweet, lilting, pretended, sweet voice that slapped me like a slap in the face every time she shamelessly looked into my mother's eyes and uttered another request. "Will you help me with my hair?" And my mother, responding to this call, as if by magic, dropped everything and hurried to her new daughter, to the girl who so easily fit into her ideal family image, while I remained in the doorway, unnoticed, as if invisible, watching the world I knew crumble apart. It reminded me of a strange, inverted play where everyone had their own rehearsed role except for me. Anna seemed to fit perfectly into the performance. She could spend hours dressing up, spinning in front of the mirror, discussing the latest fashion trends with her mom, experimenting with lipsticks and eyeshadow, asking for advice on which earrings would best match a new dress, never getting dirty, never reaching for a ball, never showing interest in sports or anything that could ruin her well-groomed appearance. But behind closed doors, out of sight of adults, she was different. I woke up late for school because someone turned off my alarm, and as I was running out of the room, I bumped into Anna, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a perfectly innocent expression on her face. "Oh, did you oversleep?" she said with feigned concern, at the moment when my mother shot me an annoyed look, shaking her head, making it clear that she considered me irresponsible. And then it got worse. Suddenly, nail polish would accidentally spill on my favorite sports shirts, or suddenly Anna would forget that the bathroom was a shared space, occupying it for an hour while I desperately washed my face in the kitchen sink, rushing to school. I tried to explain to Mom that it wasn't just a coincidence, that it was being done on purpose, but Mom just sighed wearily and exchanged knowing glances with her stepfather, saying, "Girls, you're sisters now, you need to learn to get along." "It's true," Richard added, gently stroking his daughter's head, "you just need more time." But how could you get along with a man who turned your life into a daily ordeal, who smiled when you were punished for something you didn't do, who pretended to be an innocent lamb in front of adults, but as soon as they turned away, his eyes flashed with triumph. As soon as you made the slightest mistake, she immediately used it against you. She would arrange minor troubles by hiding textbooks, putting salt in my tea, tearing the pages of my notebooks, and if I got angry, the performance would immediately begin, trembling lips, forced tears, sobbing about how I was hurting her, and, of course, my mother would immediately rush to her defense, a little princess. That's when I started looking for salvation. I increasingly went to my grandmother, who lived a few blocks away, and her house always smelled of fresh pastries and lavender. It was always calm, warm, and cozy, and most importantly, I didn't have to pretend, fight for attention, or feel unwanted or broken. "Are you sure everything is fine at home?" my grandmother asked. Her eyes were penetrating. They showed the understanding that I so lacked in my own family. "Yes, it's fine," I replied, even though I knew it wasn't true. I just didn't want to burden her with unnecessary worries. "I just like spending time with you," I would add, and Grandma would smile, squeezing my hand in hers, warm, dry, dear. There was more love and care in this gesture than in all the conversations with my mother over the past few years. I didn't feel wrong in my grandmother's house. I didn't feel like a stranger. There was no endless talk about makeup and femininity. There was no criticism of my clothes. There was no feeling that I was being watched, evaluated, judged. As time passed, the years dragged on, and finally, I graduated from high school, realizing that now I had a chance to escape from this life, where I had long ceased to be seen. I spent months studying colleges, not giving myself a break, staying up late on applications, checking every word in an essay, editing, rewriting, checking every little thing so that everything was perfect, so that I didn't have a single chance of rejection. I sent my documents to several schools, hoping that at least one of them would open the doors to the future for me, the opportunity to leave this house, this life, where I was not noticed, not appreciated, where my opinion, my dreams were always secondary compared to other people's desires. When the enrollment letters started coming, I could hardly contain my excitement, afraid to rejoice too early, but as I opened one after another, I couldn't believe it. I was accepted into 3 colleges at once, and among them was one that stood out especially. He offered a partial scholarship, his education was at a decent level, and most importantly, he was several states away from home, which meant that I could finally be myself, far from my mother's disappointed looks, from Anna's sarcastic smirks, from the feeling that I was superfluous in my own family. I was rehearsing how I would tell them, hoping that maybe this time it would be different, that maybe they would finally be proud of me, at least for a moment. I chose the morning, breakfast time, when Mom was usually in the best mood, when the air at the table was not yet saturated with irritation and nagging. "I've been accepted into 3 colleges," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady despite the lump of excitement in my throat. "One of them offers me a partial scholarship." Mom looked up from her coffee cup, her face remained impenetrable, and Anna, who had already turned 14 and had become even more unbearable in recent years than before, stopped with a piece of toast in her hand, but said nothing, waiting for her mother's reaction. "Tuition won't be too expensive with a scholarship," I added, hurriedly pulling out the letter of enrollment, but I didn't have time to say more because Mom had already exchanged a glance with Richard. "You're an adult now," she said in a flat, cold voice. "You need to learn how to deal with your problems on your own." I felt like I'd been hit. So many years, so much effort, so much work, and all for this? I looked at her, hoping that maybe I had misheard her, that maybe there was something in her words that I hadn't caught, but the next second she said, "We don't have money for your college right now." She pursed her lips as if she didn't want to say it out loud, but she said anyway, "We're saving up for Anna's education." I barely had time to notice how my stepsister's face lit up with smug satisfaction, and when my mother turned away, Anna, like a 14-year-old version of the little girl she once was, stuck out her tongue at me, enjoying this moment. I looked at her, knowing that if I had done the same thing, if I had ever responded in kind, my mother would have seen it out of the corner of her eye, would have shaken her head reproachfully, would have called me incontinent, unreasonable, again, would have said that I should be wiser, because that I'm older, because I'm supposed to be inferior. But I tried to object, my voice trembling with emotions that I could barely contain, even with a scholarship. "No, Catherine," Mom snapped, and there was the usual finality in her voice, the one that was useless to fight, and after a second she turned around. To Anna, completely forgetting about me, switching to his ideal daughter. "Honey, don't forget, you have a dance rehearsal today." "I won't forget, Mom," Anna replied sweetly, emphasizing the word "mom" and giving me a meaningful look in which there was obvious mockery. I couldn't take it anymore. I abruptly pushed back my chair and left the table, feeling everything inside burning with anger, resentment, and pain. My breakfast was untouched, but no one called out to me, no one tried to stop me, no one even asked what was wrong with me. Behind me, I could hear Mom and Anna laughing, discussing something of their own, as if I didn't exist at all. In my room, I let my tears run wild. All these years, all this struggle for good grades, for the right to be myself, for the opportunity to leave, and that's what I got. They were saving money for Anna's college, but they couldn't spare a single cent for me. They decided in advance that she deserves a better future, and I have to get out on my own. I have to solve my own problems, because I am an adult. The next morning, I went straight to my grandmother. She barely looked at me before giving me a big, really big hug, as if she sensed how much I needed it. "What's wrong, honey?" "What is it?" she asked, leading me into her cozy kitchen, which always smelled of fresh bread and coffee, where every object seemed soaked with warmth, care, and memories of the times when I felt loved. I told her everything about the letters, about the scholarship, about how my mother refused to help me, about the money that was saved only for Anna. With each word, I saw Grandma's face darken, as her fingers tightened on the coffee cup, and in the end she just shook her head. "This is ridiculous," she finally said, and there was something in her voice that I'd never heard before: disappointment, indignation, even anger. "Sarah has completely forgotten about herself," she added softly, as if saying this not to me, but to herself. She reached across the table and took my hand, and there was so much warmth and understanding in that gesture that I felt a lump rise in my throat again. At that moment, I knew that Grandma would not leave me alone. "Don't worry about college, Catherine, I'll pay for it," Grandma said as simply as if it were the most mundane thing in the world, but I immediately shook my head because I couldn't let her take on such responsibility. "No, Grandma, I can't ask you to do that," I objected, but she just squeezed my hand tighter, her gaze full of determination, in which there was no room for doubt. "You're not asking, I'm offering," she replied firmly, and in those words sounded the strength that I always felt in her, that unbending confidence that Mom had lost, and I might never even have had. "I've been saving money all my life, and what better use is there for it than my granddaughter's education? You're going to go to this college, and you're going to make your dad proud." Hearing these words, I felt something inside me tremble, either relief, gratitude, or pain from the realization that there is a person who truly believes in me, who is ready to support me without demanding anything in return. I clenched my teeth, trying to hold back the tears, but Grandma saw everything. She always saw everything, and just patted my hand, making it clear that I didn't need to pretend to be strong in front of her. When I got home that evening, my mom was waiting for me in the living room, sitting on the couch with such an expression on her face that it was immediately clear to me that she knew everything. His lips were pressed tightly together, his eyes sparkled with anger, his arms were crossed over his chest. It wasn't just annoyance, it was real, icy anger. "So that's why you ran to Grandma to complain about me?" Her voice was full of venom, and she didn't even give me a chance to open my mouth before she continued. "She called me today right from the doorstep, started yelling about how I was neglecting you, and that she refuses to pay for your college." Mom jumped up from the couch. Her movements were sharp, her lips trembled with suppressed rage. "How dare you make me look bad in front of my own mother?" "I didn't make you look bad," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm, even though everything was boiling inside me. "You did it yourself when you chose your stepdaughter over me." Her face contorted with rage. "Ungrateful," she screamed, her voice trembling, and I saw her hands clench into fists. "After all I've done for you. And now you're trying to create trouble between me and my mother." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All I did was just tell my grandmother the truth, telling her that they refused to help me because the money was being saved for Anna, because I wasn't a priority. "Really?" Mom laughed bitterly. "The truth is, you're a spoiled brat who can't accept that she's no longer the center of attention." I felt as if something inside of me had finally broken down, as the last remnants of hope for understanding had disappeared, leaving behind only a cold emptiness. "Go to your room. I don't want to see you until morning." I turned around and ran out of the living room, slamming my bedroom door so hard that the walls shook. My hands were shaking as I turned the lock, and through the thin walls I could hear Anna's muffled laughter from her room. She probably heard everything and enjoyed every second of this moment. I couldn't sleep that night. Instead, I packed up my things, important documents, some photos of my father, medals that we won together, a couple of sets of clothes, some money that I was saving for a random day, which, as it turned out, came right now. By dawn, I had everything I needed. I waited until I heard my mom leave the house for her morning yoga class, and without wasting a second, I slipped out the door, feeling lighter with every step, with every breath. The air was fresh, clean, filled with the smell of wet grass in the morning sun. It smelled like a new beginning, like freedom. I didn't look back as I walked to my grandmother's house. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she had been waiting for me, as if she knew this moment would come, and without saying a word, she just pulled me to her, hugging me tightly. That evening, after settling into the spare room that Grandma had prepared for me, I sent my mom a message. I'm staying with Grandma until college starts. Don't worry about me. The screen lit up with a read notification, but there was no response. Not that day, not the next, never. The silence spoke volumes. About my place in her life now. That she wouldn't try to get me back. That she might never have considered me really important. The weeks before college passed quickly. I found a job at a small Sweet Beam cafe located a few blocks from my grandmother's house, and I took as many shifts as they could give me, putting every dollar I earned into a savings account, preparing for the fact that a new life awaits me, which will finally belong only to me. Finally, the day of departure arrived. It was quiet at the station. Early in the morning, the platform was half empty. My grandmother was standing next to me, squeezing my hands in her warm palms. Call me when you get there, she said, hugging me tightly, and then, pulling back slightly, she added, and remember, you can always come home. Now your home is your home. I looked around the station for the last time. Part of me was still hoping to see my mom at the last moment, hoping that maybe she would change her mind, that maybe something inside her would shake, make her come and say goodbye, but the only family there was my grandmother, waving at me. Until the train disappeared from sight. College turned out to be everything I had hoped for, and even more. For the first time in many years, I could breathe freely, not being afraid to say something wrong, not looking over my shoulder in anticipation of ridicule or reproach, not adjusting to other people's expectations, but simply living the way I wanted. I met people who accepted me for who I was, who didn't try to change me, didn't expect me to conform to their ideas, who just appreciated me for me, and this feeling was something new, something almost overwhelming in its simplicity. I got a job at the library, and the quiet atmosphere among the shelves full of books quickly became a real refuge for me, putting publications by numbers, helping students search for research materials, flipping through old catalogs was something soothing, and most importantly, stable, giving me the feeling that I was finally standing on solid ground. The salary was small, but I didn't have to ask my grandmother for money, which was fundamentally important to me. I wanted to be independent. I wanted to prove to myself that I could handle it. However, every month, Grandma still sent me several hundred, and no matter how many times I tried to refuse, she always insisted, reminding me that she was doing this not because I was asking, but because she wanted to help. Mom, on the other hand, became a ghost in my life. Her presence was reduced to rare text messages, to on-duty holiday greetings that seemed empty, devoid of any real feeling. One day, around the middle of my freshman year, I received a text from her. How are you? 3 short words that seemed to have nothing behind them, and I stared at the phone screen for a long time, not knowing what to answer, but in the end I just typed, "Great, I'm studying hard," and sent it. It was our longest conversation in months. After that, a strange routine was established between us: Merry Christmas, Happy Birthday, and nothing more. Each message seemed more empty than the previous one, as if she was writing them just because it was supposed to be, and not because she really wanted to know how I was living. Sometimes I saw photos of my mom and Anna on social media. They were sitting in expensive restaurants, walking through shopping malls, traveling, and in all the pictures they looked absolutely happy, as if they really had everything they dreamed of, and maybe they did. As time passed, graduation was approaching, and while filling out the invitation envelopes, I wrote 2 addresses, one to my grandmother, the other to my mother. The second invitation was like a message in a bottle thrown into the ocean. I knew it would probably go unanswered, but something inside me made me send it anyway, as if a small, stubborn part of me still hoped. When my grandmother called, I immediately realized that something was wrong. Her voice trembled when she said my name, and my heart sank with anticipation. "Catherine, honey," she said softly, as if trying to soften the blow beforehand, "I'm not feeling well enough to travel. The doctor said I need to rest." My heart sank. After 4 years of hard work, after all the nights spent studying, after all the attempts to escape from the past, the only person I really wanted to see that day would not be able to come. I tried to hide my disappointment, but Grandma knew me too well. "I'm so sorry, darling. I wanted to be there so much." Her voice was full of sincere sadness, and all I could do was squeeze out, "It's okay, Grandma, you just rest." But it wasn't okay. That night, I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in bed, trying to find a way out, because if Grandma couldn't come to the prom, maybe prom can come to her. In the morning, while most of the students were still asleep, I found Tyler, my classmate who was obsessed with gadgets, and cornered him at the cafeteria. "Hey, do you still have that mini camera that can do live broadcasts?" He squinted, studying me curiously. I explained my plan to him, and as I spoke, his face gradually lit up with delight. "That's brilliant," he exclaimed, not waiting for me to finish. "We can attach it to your graduation robe, and your grandma will be able to watch everything in real time on her phone." When I called my grandmother to tell her about it, I could hear the smile in her voice, and even despite the distance, I felt better knowing that she would still be there. "You mean, will I be able to see everything as if I'm there?" "Everything," I promised, clutching my phone. "You'll hear the speeches, you'll see me walking across the stage." "That's it." She started crying. But this time it was tears of happiness. "You're so smart. Like your father. He would be so proud of you, Catherine." Later that day, I gathered my friends to warn them about the broadcast. "Just watch your speech, okay? My grandmother will listen," I said, and they laughed kindly. "Don't worry," my roommate winked at me. Sarah assured me that she and the others would behave in the best possible way, and I wanted to believe her, but standing in front of the mirror that evening, when all the preparations were almost complete, I couldn't shake the feeling of anxious anticipation that burned inside me. I was rehearsing how I would walk across the stage, imagining my grandmother watching me from her bed, probably with napkins at the ready, wiping away tears of pride and joy. It wasn't the graduation ceremony I dreamed of when I first started college, but somehow that's how it was supposed to happen. That's how this day found its perfection. The graduation ceremony was exactly what I imagined it to be. The sun was shining, the campus building was shining in the morning rays, students dressed in traditional robes stood in groups, talking excitedly, and I, sensing my grandmother's presence through a small camera attached to my graduation clothes, knew that she was seeing everything, that she's there, even if she can't be here physically. I felt warmth spreading through my body from the thought that, despite all the difficulties, I had reached this point, I had coped, I had won. But then I saw her. Sitting in the middle section, in a dark blue dress that I had never seen before, she sat with her back perfectly straight, her arms folded in her lap, and seemed to be listening attentively to the speeches delivered by the graduates. For a moment, I thought I was mistaken, that it was someone similar, that my mind was just playing tricks on me, but no, it was her, my mother. My hand trembled as I adjusted my graduation hat, grateful that Grandma couldn't see my face through the camera. I managed to keep my composure even when I stepped onto the stage, even when the dean handed me my diploma, even when the students applauded each other, but all the while I felt her gaze burning through me, the gaze that I knew so well, which saw me not as a person, but as a function, as a part. A carefully constructed system that should work in her favor. What was she doing here? She didn't respond to the invitation. She hadn't spoken to me for months, except for the holiday messages on duty. She hadn't been around all these years when I was trying to build my life, and now suddenly she was here. After the ceremony, when my friends were taking pictures with their families, laughing and hugging each other, and when the graduates were joyfully accepting congratulations, my mother suddenly appeared next to me, her hand lightly resting on my elbow. "Catherine," her voice was flat, as if nothing had happened, as if we weren't strangers. "Can we talk in private?" My throat tightened, but I nodded anyway, letting her lead me away to a large oak tree that cast a long shadow on the green lawn. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest, ridiculous, painful, but still alive. Maybe she finally understood, maybe she came to apologize, maybe something has changed. "I'm proud of you," she said, and in that brief, vivid moment, I felt like that little girl again, who desperately needed her approval, who did everything just to hear those words. And then she continued. "And now that you've graduated from high school and you're going to start working, we need to talk about funding your sister's college." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I barely recognized my voice, it sounded muffled, as if it came from somewhere far away. "Anna just graduated from high school," Mom continued, as if we were discussing the weather. "Her grades aren't as good as yours, so she won't get a scholarship. She will have to pay for her education in full." I stared at her, unable to comprehend what I had just heard. "And what does that have to do with me?" Mom's face became hard, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Many years ago, you told me that you were saving money for her college," I reminded her, the words coming out of my mouth on their own, burning the air like fire. "That's why you couldn't help me. Do you remember?" She squinted, as if she didn't expect me to remember. "We had other expenses." "There are problems, Catherine. You need to stop living in the past and help your family." "Help my family?" I felt anger boiling up in me, my chest constricting from the fact that after everything I'd been through, she still saw me only as a resource, as something that could be used. The same family that kicked me out, my voice was shaking with rage. The sister who made my life unbearable for years. She sighed in exasperation. "Don't be dramatic, Catherine. You left on your own. I won't pay for her college." My words were clear, firm, so that no one would have any doubts. Mom's eyes flashed with rage, and her hand shot out and gripped my wrist, her fingers painfully digging into my skin. "Listen to me, you selfish, arrogant girl," she hissed, her face too close, her breath burning my cheek. "You have to help your sister. If you refuse, don't even think about going back to the house after graduation." I stared at her in silence. "Actually," she added, narrowing her eyes, "I will completely disown you." "Is that what you want?" "This house belongs to Grandma," I reminded her, trying to keep my voice steady, even though everything was boiling inside, rage rising in waves, shaking me from the inside out. But Mom just laughed, coldly, cruelly, in that unpleasant, mocking tone I'd never heard from her before. "Oh, honey," she drawled, her voice low, almost lazy, and there was something eerily sinister in it, something that sent a chill down my spine. "Do you really think it matters? Grandma is not feeling well. She's been sick for a while." My stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" "To be honest, she stayed longer than anyone expected," Mom shrugged, as if she were talking about the weather, as if she were discussing something completely mundane. "But when she dies, and it won't be long, I'll get everything. I'm her only daughter, after all." I felt sick. Not from her words, but from her tone. Not from what she said about Grandma's death, but from the way she did it, calmly, with barely concealed hope, with that strange gleam in her eyes that I couldn't quite see, but which disgusted me. It wasn't my mother. Or maybe it was her. Maybe I just finally saw her the way she always was. "I'm not going to help you," I said, pulling my hand out of her grasp. "Not now, not ever." I practically ran back to my dorm room, my graduation robes billowing behind me like a sail catching the wind. As soon as I slammed the door behind me, the phone rang. Grandmother. "Catherine," her voice was sharp, clear, with no trace of the illness her mother had mentioned. I exhaled sharply, and my hand automatically flew to the camera still attached to my robe. In all this drama, I completely forgot about the live broadcast. Grandma heard it. She witnessed the whole ugly scene. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," I whispered, sinking onto the bed, feeling my strength drain away. "I didn't want you to. I need you to pack your things and come home immediately. Can you do that?" It took several hours to get to my grandmother's house, but all the time my mother's words, her indifferent voice, her cold attitude, her confidence that she has the right to everything that belongs to my grandmother, her unshakable belief that the world should revolve around her, were spinning in my head. How could she? How can you be so callous to your own mother? When I arrived, Grandma was sitting in her favorite armchair in the living room. She looked frail, haggard, but there was a familiar strength in her eyes. She hugged me tightly, and then, taking my hand, set me down at the kitchen table. "I had a very interesting conversation with your mom this morning," she said, pouring us each a cup of tea. I was silent, warming my palms on the porcelain, not knowing what to say. "After I heard what she said to you at graduation, I called her and told her to move out of my house." I almost choked on my tea. "What are you doing?" Grandma calmly took a sip. She was quite shocked. Apparently, she lived under the delusion that my house was somehow her home. The next morning, my grandmother and I drove to her house, the very house where my mother lived with Richard and Anna, and I felt the tension building up inside me. When we arrived, they were already there. Mom was standing in the center of the living room with her arms crossed over her chest. Richard was sitting on the couch with his arms folded, and Anna, who had grown taller over the years but still wore the same smug expression, was standing by the window, idly flipping through her phone, not even deigning to look at me. Mom glanced at me briefly, but immediately shifted her gaze to Grandma, as if I didn't exist at all. "Mother, this is all a misunderstanding," she said, her voice sweet, almost sincere, but I didn't need to be a genius to hear the fake notes. "Catherine lied to you. I never said I'd kick her out or anything like that." Grandma sat down in her old armchair, folded her hands in her lap. Her gaze was cold, implacable. "I heard everything, Sarah," she said slowly, and I felt my throat go dry. The camera on the graduation robe. Catherine captured all this. Grandma's voice remained calm, but there was a steel in it that pierced the air more precisely than any accusation. "Every threat, every cruel word, including your charming comments about the hope of my imminent death." I saw how the color drained from Mom's face, how her fingers clenched into fists, how fear flashed in her eyes, not the one that comes with guilt, but the one that is caused by loss of control. But she quickly pulled herself together. Her lips curved into that fake smile I've known since childhood, the one she put on in front of strangers when she wanted to convince them of her innocence. "Oh, Mom, you must have misunderstood." Her voice suddenly became soft and warm, but I could see panic sparkling in the depths of her eyes. "We can talk about this later when everything calms down." "No, Sarah, it won't be later." Grandma took a sip of tea and put the cup on the table so carefully that the sound of it touching the wood sounded louder than her mother's words. "I'll take Catherine to the notary tomorrow morning. I will transfer ownership of this house to her, and while we are there, I will update my will to ensure that all my savings will also go to her." The silence that followed was almost palpable, heavy, thick, filling the entire living room. Anna froze in place, her mouth slightly opened, and an expression of sincere shock appeared on her face. For the first time, it seems, in her life something was not going according to her script. Richard drooped, as if he had suddenly become half his size, and Mom exploded. Manipulative little. She broke into a scream, the whole mask of politeness disappeared, and here in front of me was no longer a well-groomed, confident woman, but an angry, deceived man who had just had his blindfold ripped off. "That was your plan from the beginning, wasn't it? You wanted to turn my own mother against me by playing the victim until you got everything you wanted." She took a step forward, but Grandma immediately stood up, standing between us. "Sarah, that's enough." Her voice was low, but with such authority that Mom froze in place. "You're both crazy." Mom screamed, her hands shaking with rage. "My own mother and daughter are conspiring against me." She spun around, pointing at her grandmother. "You're just a pathetic old woman who's been deceived by false loyalty." Grandma didn't even blink. "You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave," she said softly but firmly. There was a silence so deep that it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. But then everything began to move. Mom, Richard, and Anna were rushing around the house, throwing things into boxes and suitcases, slamming cupboard doors, rattling drawers, making as much noise as possible, as if their protest was expressed in every rumble, in every clang of metal, in every heavy step. And my grandmother and I were just sitting in the living room, watching the clock. Exactly 58 minutes later, they left. The house seemed strangely empty. Clean. Like the air after a storm. That evening, as my grandmother and I were sitting in the kitchen making plans for the near future, a thought suddenly occurred to me, and I hesitated, but said it out loud. "Grandma, why don't you move in here with me? We could rent out your house, and I would take care of you." She looked at me thoughtfully, her fingers lightly drumming on the rim of the cup. "You know, it's not such a bad idea." I smiled. "This house is bigger, after all, and it would be great to have company." "You're right, honey. I think it would be good." That's what we did. Grandma's house was rented out to a wonderful young family, providing her with a stable income beyond her savings, and our house was gradually filled with life. Not the one that was here before, but a new, warm, real one. We turned the living room into a cozy communal space where we spent our evenings watching old movies, cooking dinners together, and telling each other stories. Sometimes I saw Mom and Anna in the city, briefly, on the street or in the store. They always quickly turned away, as if they hadn't noticed me, as if they preferred to pretend that I didn't exist for them. I've heard from mutual friends that they moved to a small apartment on the other side of town, and that Anna ended up going not to the expensive university she dreamed of, but to an ordinary community college. But to be honest, I hardly think about them anymore. My life is full of other things now. My job, my friends, my independence. And, most importantly, my grandmother is the person who showed me what unconditional love really means. We have created our own family. A small one. But a real one. Every morning I wake up to the smell of Grandma's coffee and the sound of her singing in the kitchen, and it always makes me smile. Every evening we sit together in the garden, and she teaches me how to take care of it, telling me which flowers should be planted side by side so that they help each other grow. And every day I'm grateful for the twist of fate that made me wear that camera to prom.